What did you want to be when you grew up, and what jobs did you end up having?
So I knew very early on that I wanted to be a secretary. And my mother was a secretary. And why I wanted to be a secretary, I don't know. Um, I forgot to tell you that during my childhood, I remember being friends with my mother. And I know I'm going back and regressing, but I remember thinking that my mother was so much of a friend that I called her Rhoda. I didn't call her mom. And this was as I was old enough to drive a car. So I would do her chores for her that she hated to do. I would take um, the dry cleaning to the dry cleaners. I would do the grocery shopping. I would do the things that she didn't want to do to earn using the car. And she was always like a friend to me. And maybe that's why I wanted to be a secretary. But I knew I didn't want to go to college. I hated school, hated it with a passion. I wasn't a great student, although I was really good in typing. I was really good in shorthand. I was really good in, I was good in English. I only took business math. I never took any more difficult math than business math. And I took business law, I think, something like that. But I remember my senior year, I was the typist of the year, and I got an accolade for that. So I knew I wanted to be a secretary. And right out of high school, I spent the summer working at a department store in their Trim the Christmas Tree department, which I loved because I got to pick any ornament and decorate all the Christmas trees any way that I wanted to. And then I don't know why I didn't start right away, but then I got a job as a secretary. And my first job as a secretary was working for Putzel and Danoff. And they were family law, and they were also, um, I forgot what other kind of law it was, where they would garnish people's wages to get money because they didn't pay certain bills that they needed to pay, whether it would be child support or a bill that they owed that they had reneged on. Um, I would have to type up these 5 forms with carbon paper. It was before there was any computers or word processors, and I loved that job. That's where I met Ann Mank, who became a really, really good friend of mine. And I remember working there for probably a few years, and then Mrs. Putzel, who was in charge, brought me into her office and told me that they had a new bookkeeping system and she was going to teach me how to do it, and I was going to do the books in addition to being their secretary. And I didn't like math. I only took business math, and I didn't like math, and I didn't want to be the bookkeeper. So I told her I didn't want to be the bookkeeper, I was a secretary. And she said, "But I can teach you this and you can learn it." And I said, "Maybe you should hire a bookkeeper secretary." And she said, "You're right, maybe I should." And she fired me, which I found devastating. Devastating. So I came home that night and I cried my eyes out. And Dad said, "Don't worry about it. You're a good secretary. You'll find another job in no time." And I took the summer off. I asked if I could take the summer off. And I took the summer off. And when you're that age, it was before I had you and Mickey. And when you're that age and all of your friends are that age, it's no fun to take the summer off because there's nobody having the summer off to play with. So I would sit home and I would watch QVC and I would order spices from QVC, and Dad was working for McCormick, and it was the stupidest thing in the world. Or he was working for a spice company at the time, and I didn't cook, and he would say, "Why did you order spices?" Or I would order cleaning solutions. It was ridiculous. So I then got a job the with um, Frank Bernstein, Conaway and Goldman, which was in downtown Baltimore. And I worked for labor lawyers there. It was a huge law firm in the heart of downtown Baltimore in a big building. And I would take the subway every day. I would drive from our house to the subway station, leave my car, take the subway, get off the subway, and walk 5 or 6 blocks to the office, and then do the same thing coming home. And that was a good job for me. I liked it, and I was very good at it, to the point where I would finish the work that I had to do, and I would always go around to all, it was a huge law firm, and I would go around to all the other lawyers, secretaries, and say, do you need any help? And I would help out in all the different departments and do all kinds of typing for anybody that needed anything. And I can't remember why I left there, because I was very happy there, but I did go to work for DISC at some point, which was a computer software company. And I went as a secretary, and it was a small Jewish owned software company, and software was very big then. And that's where I met Marilyn Lemmerman, and a we were in a very small house on Naylor's Lane that later became the offices of our accountants. It's funny when they moved into a bigger building, but that's where I learned um, the computer, which was a word processor back then, and that freaked me out. I mean, I was a secretary there. It was a very small firm, and um, I remember coming home and crying because I didn't want to stop using my Selectric typewriter that had the correction tape. But I learned how to do it, and the firm grew and moved into a bigger building. And then they had different departments, and they had a meeting planning department. And Rhoda Baverman was in charge of meeting planning, and she was having an affair with the big boss. And I helped her. I ended up being in her department, and I would go to the conferences and help her with the meeting planning stuff until I took it over from her and I became their meeting planner. And that was my biggest step up in my career. That was the culmination of everything that I'd ever done, because it was where I found myself. It was what I was really good at. I actually had I actually got a certification. I had to do schooling and learn things and take a big huge test. Was the first big test I've ever taken in my life. And I got my certification. I became a certified meeting professional. So I had initials next to my name, and I felt very, very accomplished. Um, that was that was my best career time of my whole life. I planned all of their small meetings to their um, users conferences, which were their bigger meetings. I did their site inspections, which was really fun because I got to travel. I was treated like royalty. I was picked up in limousines, and it was an amazing time. They don't do it like that anymore. But in my lifetime, it was an amazing time, and Dad got to get some of the benefits of that, because when they were courting me to try to get me to do my meetings in their locations, I was given things. I was invited to one of Disney's celebrations where I got to bring Dad, stay in the Grand Floridian Hotel, and every single day we were treated to 3 meals a day. And when I got back to the room, there were gifts left for us. We got Mickey Mouse watches and Mickey Mouse umbrellas and towels, and it was just amazing. And then I got to put together and contact all of the people that were a part of this conference. And I remember having you and Mickey come and on the weekends help me put the books together for these conferences. And I would have to contact every presenter, and they sent me their materials, and I would have to copy it and lay it out on the table, so you would walk around the table and put the notebooks together, and then we would order pizza and eat pizza as a reward for putting all these notebooks together. And it was a very rewarding job for me because I was recognized for the things I did, and I felt like I could do them very well. And the conferences were always huge successes, so I know I did it very well. Even though at the conference, if something went wrong, which it always did, everybody would come to me, and I would make it go away magically. You know, I would get up at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning and meet with whoever was on duty and make sure the room was set up the way it was supposed to be set up and fix whatever housing problem there was. It was a remarkable um, time in my life, which is probably why I don't remember parenting as much as I do, because I don't remember the years that I did that. But I know that you were old enough that you could help me put books together, but young enough that you didn't mind doing it. It was fun for you because you got a reward of pizza, as I remember it. So you can tell me later if you didn't. But I I remember having to work some nights where I would be there because they would be having a meeting of the speakers that would come into town, and I'd have to take them out to dinner, or I'd have to do a small reception, and I would bring home all the leftovers, and you and Mickey could eat the leftover shrimps wrapped in bacon, or pigs in a blanket, or whatever was left over. I always brought back home. So I remember those times as being very rewarding in my life. And then that company got bought out, and they let all of us go. So I was young enough that I had to find another job, and I was a qualified meeting planner at that time. So I looked for meeting planning jobs, and that's when I went to work for the American Urological Association, which was a very, very different job for me because I was now a part of a team that put on these meetings, and I just took direction. And it was a huge organization that all urologists went to their conferences. So I wasn't a part of picking where these conferences were going to be. Number one, because there were only like 7 or 8 places in the whole United States that were big enough to house it, because it was meetings, because these doctors were going for their um, their extended credits, which were called CEUs, and it's
Continuing education
continuing
units.
education units. So they had to do that to remain urologists. It was part of their careers to have that, and we provided that. So in addition to having all those meetings, we had a huge exhibit hall where all of the um, vendors and the pharmacists that supplied things to the urologists put on a big show. So we had to have a huge hall for an exhibition hall as well. So I then became a part of the meeting planning team that went and did whatever we were told to do to make the meeting happen. And I enjoyed that. I didn't have way near the responsibility that I had, but I got to help planning and I got to go to the conferences, which was fun because I got to do some traveling. And then life changed because Dad lost his job. And um, that was when we had to move away from Baltimore. Dad tried really, really hard to find a job in Baltimore so that I didn't have to leave. But after what was almost a year, and he was going to lose his his the month,
Severance.
what was it called?
Severance.
His severance. Thank you. He was going to lose his severance, and he'd done the consulting work that he was going to do. He had to find a job, and that's when we moved to Wichita. So you were already grown and in college and away from home. So it was a move that we could make fairly easily because we weren't we weren't disturbing your lives. So that made it easier. But we had lived in Baltimore for 50 years, and we had friends, and our family was there, and we were the first ones out of all of our friends to move. So it was really, really difficult to do. It was, um, it was the hardest thing I'd had to do thus far in my life. I'm trying to think of if I was upset about that as I was about the first miscarriage. But it was right there on an even level if it wasn't just below that. But it was really hard to leave Baltimore. It was scary and it was really hard, and Dad had a job and I didn't. So when we first moved to, and I know we moved to Connecticut for a little while. I forgot that part. And I hated Connecticut, and luckily we were only in Connecticut for 8 months or so, and that corrected itself. So I didn't work in Connecticut. It didn't matter. It wasn't a big part of my life, other than it was my first Calgon bath. Because I lost it one day because I didn't have a job and I didn't know what I was doing with myself. And I just lost it and said, I hate it here. I'm going to take a Calgon bath. But then when we, came back to Baltimore, it was like we never left because we did get to come back to Baltimore. And when we had to leave for Wichita, it was really uprooting because we were older and I wasn't old enough not to work in my mind. I felt like I still had to get a job. So when we moved to Wichita, Dad had his job, so I immediately, because I was there and I had nothing to do, I started looking for work. So I went through the yellow pages and looked for organizations thinking I'll find a meeting planning job with a big organization. And the only organization in Wichita, Kansas is Decorative Painters. So I called the Decorative Painters and asked them if I could come in and talk to them. And told them I was a meeting planner, and they did do meetings, but they didn't have a position available. But they let me come in and bring a resume and talk to them. So I did. I went in and gave them my resume and talked to them, and they said they would keep it on file. And then we were only there for, I think it was 8 months or so before they wanted to transfer Dad to Milwaukee. So when we moved to Milwaukee, I got a job with um, a travel agency there. And it was part-time and it was in the city, so we didn't live in the city. It was a commute, maybe 45-minute drive to get there. And I worked part-time and it was an okay job. but I didn't love it, so I just did it because it was extra money and it kept me busy. And after 2 years, we moved back. Oh, and while we were there, I got a call from the decorative painters that they had a job for me in Wichita. Of course, we didn't live there anymore. But when we moved back to Wichita, we had decided that Dad made enough money that I didn't have to work. And Wichita had all of my friends were synagogue friends. All of them were synagogue friends, and they were all there because their husbands were doctors, and that was a good place for them to be transferred to. So I had things to do during the day with all of these women who didn't work. So I was okay giving up my career. And that was the end of my working until we moved to Sun City. And even when we lived in Charlotte, Dad got a job in Charlotte. And when we lived in Charlotte, we only lived there for a year, and I still didn't work. But I played mahjong with a girl whose husband said, "There's a Sun City opening right over the border. You got to get your name on the list." And we got our name on the list, and we knew we wanted to move there. And as soon as I knew we wanted to live here, I immediately told the salesperson in charge of all the salespeople that I wanted to get a job working for them. And they took my resume and we talked, and I got a job. So I worked at Sun City 2 days a week and one Saturday a month from before we even lived here. So I worked here. I started, I believe, the March before we moved in, and there weren't even models at the time, but there was a sales office. And I worked until we were all sold out. They closed the sales office and they opened another Del Webb about a half an hour away from us in another part of South Carolina called Carolina Orchards. And I worked there for a few months, but I didn't like it, so then I officially retired. But it was fun working here for the 15 years or so that I worked here part-time, because I got to meet people that were going to be moving here, potentially. And I got to meet a lot of Jewish people here because I wore a badge that said, "Ask me about Mahjong." And if they would say, "Oh, I play Mahjong," I would say, "How long have you been playing?" And if they would say, "I just learned a few years ago," I knew that they weren't Jewish, that they learned from another community. And it was true, because the people that played Mahjong for a long time, or would say, "Oh, my mother played Mahjong," they were all Jewish, and it was a bonding thing, and it just let me know that other Jewish people were moving into the community, and it was a comfort level. And then I was okay to retire.